Idaho, November 13th, 2022. It was just past 4 in the morning in a quiet college town. The streets were empty. Porch lights burned faintly against the cold. Inside one off-campus home, 6 students were asleep after a Saturday night out. But within hours, 4 of them would be found dead. Police were called to a scene unlike anything the community had ever faced. 4 young lives ended in their own bedrooms. No forced entry. No neighbors who heard screaming loud enough to raise alarm. What had happened inside that house seemed, at first, impossible to piece together. The crime shook Moscow, Idaho, to its core. A town of just 25,000 residents, suddenly swarmed with news cameras, satellite trucks, and FBI agents. Rumors spread online. Was it random? Was it targeted? Or was the killer still walking among them? But investigators weren't relying on speculation. They were working the evidence. And slowly, a pattern began to form. First, surveillance video. A white sedan gliding through the neighborhood again and again in the dark hours of the night. The car never stopped. It circled, drove away, came back. Then digital footprints. Phone records showing a device connected to towers near the victim's home more than a dozen times in the weeks before the murders. Yet that same phone was curiously silent during the very window of the crime. And finally, a single piece of physical evidence. On a bed near one of the victims, police recovered the sheath of a knife, left behind, tested in a lab, and from it, a DNA profile. The threads were converging. Surveillance, cell site data, DNA, each on its own might have raised questions. Together, they pointed to one man, a graduate student living just miles away, studying criminology, driving a car identical to the one caught on camera, carrying the phone that had been near the scene, and, according to the state's lab, matching the DNA on the knife sheath. In less than 7 weeks, the investigation that began in shock and confusion would lead to a cross-country arrest at a family home over 2,000 miles away. What followed was an unfolding case that would grip the world, not just for the brutality of the crime, but for the chilling portrait of the man accused. This is the story of 4 lives cut short, a community changed forever, and the meticulous trail of evidence that prosecutors say will bring justice. 4 names would soon echo across the nation. Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, Ethan Chapin. 4 young lives, each with their own story, each with plans for the future, found brutally murdered inside a 3-story rental home near the University of Idaho on November 13th, 2022. For Moscow, a college town known more for its football games and farmers markets than violent crime, the shock was immediate and overwhelming. This was a community that hadn't seen a homicide in more than 7 years. The idea that 4 students could be taken in one night inside their own home was unthinkable. As the news spread, grief collided with fear. Students left campus. Parents demanded answers. The house on King Road became the focus of nonstop coverage, its image broadcast across every network. Who could have done this? And why? Investigators faced an enormous task. There were no signs of forced entry, no weapons recovered at the scene, and no clear motive. But what followed was one of the most dramatic manhunts in recent memory. Detectives pieced together digital footprints, car movements, and DNA evidence, threads that would ultimately lead them across the country. Years later, as the case wound through courts, the questions of motive, method, and justice continued to stir nationwide attention. And in 2025, in a packed courtroom, the man accused made a shocking guilty plea, bringing a new chapter to a story that had already gripped the world. They weren't just names and headlines. They were young people with families, friends, and lives full of promise. Ethan Chapin was the kind of person who lit up every room he entered. One of triplets, he shared a special bond with his brother and sister. Just 20 years old, Ethan was known for his humor and energy. He loved sports, loved the outdoors, and his friends described him as the one who brought joy wherever he went. Xana Kernodle was 20, a junior at the University of Idaho, studying marketing. Friends remembered her as sharp, confident, and adventurous. She had a playful side, often sharing moments of laughter on social media. Xana and Ethan had been dating, and on that November weekend, they were together at the King Roadhouse. Madison Mogen, 21, was studying marketing as well. Known as Maddie to those closest to her, she had a bright smile and a reputation for loyalty. She and Kaylee Goncalves, also 21, had been inseparable since childhood. Friends called them a match set, sisters in everything but name. Kaylee was described as warm, determined, and fiercely protective of the people she loved. She had recently adopted a new dog and was preparing to move into the next chapter of her life after college. Together, the four represented the heart of a tight-knit campus community. Their loss wasn't just tragic, it was incomprehensible. But just across the state line, another figure was living a very different life. Bryan Kohberger, 28 years old, was a doctoral student in criminology at Washington State University, less than 10 miles from Moscow. On paper, he was an academic pursuing a PhD in the study of crime. But behind the classroom facade, there were troubling signs. Students at WSU described him as unnerving, with a presence that made people uncomfortable. Some called him controlling. Others said he crossed boundaries, inserting himself into conversations with an intensity that felt invasive. Female students in particular spoke of interactions they described as inappropriate, behavior that came across as fixated, even predatory. He was someone who studied criminal behavior at a professional level, yet seemed unable to navigate basic social boundaries. Reports surfaced of him following students, of conversations that felt more like interrogations, of a reputation that left others uneasy. To investigators, the possibility that a man so fascinated with criminology could also become the subject of a nationwide manhunt was as startling as it was disturbing. But to those who knew him, the signs of unease had been there long before the world knew his name. As the nation mourned the victims, detectives were quietly turning their attention toward the man who lived just across the border, a man who, by all appearances, was hiding in plain sight. Welcome to True Crime Tapes, where we bring you the most gripping, mysterious, and heart-stopping stories from the world of true crime. If you're fascinated by the unknown and want to uncover the secrets that the world tries to hide, you're in the right place. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a chilling story. And for those of you already part of our community, welcome back. We're glad to have you with us. Drop a comment below to share your thoughts and theories, because we love hearing from you. True Crime Tapes. The truth is always stranger than fiction. The final night. Saturday, November 12th, 2022. It began like countless other weekends in a college town. Friends gathered, laughter filled living rooms, and campus nightlife spilled into the streets. That evening, Ethan Chapin and Xana Kernodle attended a party at the Sigma Chi fraternity house. Just across town, Kaylee Goncalves and Madison Mogen spent the night downtown, laughing, sharing food, visiting a local bar before returning home. By 1:45 a.m., the two women were seen on surveillance near a food truck, smiling and waiting for their order. It would be the last public image of them alive. Shortly after, they got a ride back to the King Roadhouse. Ethan and Xana returned home around the same time. By 4 a.m., all 6 roommates were back inside, 4 upstairs in their bedrooms, 2 others asleep on the ground floor who would survive the night. The house went quiet, and then, sometime between 4 o'clock and 4:25 a.m., investigators believe the killer entered. No signs of forced entry, no shattered glass, no splintered doors. Whoever came inside moved quickly and violently. Within minutes, 4 lives were taken. The brutality was staggering. Yet in the surrounding neighborhood, no one called police. No one realized what had happened behind those walls. The discovery. Morning came. Phones buzzed. Messages were sent. But friends grew concerned when calls to Kaylee and Madison went unanswered. By late morning, 2 surviving roommates awoke to a horrifying scene. In shock, they placed a call, not to 911 immediately, but to friends. Minutes later, at 11:58 a.m., a 911 call finally came through. Police arrived to find what they would later describe as one of the most disturbing crime scenes in Idaho's history. For victims, no suspect, no weapon, Only questions. The early red flags. In the hours and days that followed, strange reports began to surface. Kaylee Goncalves had told friends weeks earlier that she felt like someone was watching her. She mentioned to her father that a man had followed her while she walked her dog. On the morning the bodies were found, witnesses described the front door of the King Road home standing wide open. And in the wake of the murders, surviving roommates reportedly armed themselves with golf clubs, terrified that whoever had entered once could return. The town of Moscow, small, quiet, and tight-knit, was plunged into fear. Parents rushed to pull their children out of the university. Streets emptied at night. The idea of an unknown killer roaming free haunted the community. The investigation launched. Detectives combed through the house. There was no forced entry. The sliding glass door on the second floor could have been a point of access. But there were no fingerprints left behind, no weapon recovered. State police, the FBI, and local law enforcement launched one of the most exhaustive investigations the region had ever seen. They gathered surveillance footage from gas stations, traffic cameras, and neighborhood security systems. They collected DNA, digital records, and dozens of witness statements. Still, weeks passed without a suspect named. For the people of Moscow, frustration grew. Rumors spiraled online. Was it random? Was it targeted? Did the victims know their killer? Each day, without answers, deepened the panic. Suspense teased. And yet, detectives weren't starting at zero. In the background, they were assembling threads, tiny fragments of data that, when pieced together, began to form a picture. A car that kept reappearing, a phone that mysteriously went dark, and a single item left behind in the house, holding the clue that would break the case wide open. When investigators first stepped inside the King Road house on November 13, 2022, they were met with a scene that would stay with them forever. The three-story rental, just steps from campus, had been turned into something unrecognizable. On the second and third floors, the evidence of violence was unmistakable. Blood-smeared walls and floors. Signs of a struggle inside Xana Kernodle's room. Furniture shifted, objects overturned, as though she had fought desperately to survive. The coroner would later confirm defensive wounds on her arms, suggesting she fought her attacker until the very end. In contrast, Ethan Chapin was found nearby. The intensity of the attack left his face almost unrecognizable to those who discovered him. Upstairs, Kaylee Goncalves and Madison Mogen were found together in a bedroom. The brutality was swift and overwhelming. For law enforcement, even seasoned investigators, it was one of the most horrific crime scenes they had ever encountered. And yet, amid the chaos, one detail would stand out. On the bed beside Madison Mogen's body lay a single item, a tan leather sheath for a large knife. It bore the imprint of a U.S. military-style weapon, the kind known as a K-bar. Police scoured the house for the blade itself, but the murder weapon was never found. The sheath, however, was sent immediately for testing. It would later prove to hold a vital clue, a DNA profile left behind by the killer. The survivors of that night, two young roommates on the ground floor, were spared, but the trauma they endured was profound. One of them reportedly opened her door in the early hours and saw a figure dressed in black, wearing a mask, walking past her toward the sliding door. Frozen in fear, she locked herself inside her room. The shock and silence of survival haunted them for months. For the investigators, the crime scene was both devastating and puzzling. No forced entry, no weapon, but the evidence, the blood patterns, the sheath, the survivors' accounts, began to outline a chilling picture. Who was the most valuable lead? Sent to the Idaho State Crime Lab, technicians found a single male DNA profile on the button snap. At first, it matched no one in law enforcement databases. But investigators turned to a new technique, investigative genetic genealogy. Through this method, they built a family tree of potential relatives, narrowing the pool until one name rose to the surface. Bryan Kohberger, a 28-year-old criminology PhD student at Washington State University. To confirm the match, FBI agents went undercover near Kohberger's family home in Pennsylvania. In the days before his arrest, they retrieved trash bags from the curbside. Inside was DNA from his father, which lab results confirmed matched the sheath DNA with near certainty. The killer had not been a stranger to science, but he had left behind the one trace that science could never forgive. The arrest timeline. On December 30th, 2022, at around 1:30 a.m., a tactical team swarmed the quiet neighborhood of Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. Kohberger was taken into custody at his parents' home. Just weeks later, on January 4th, 2023, he was extradited back to Idaho under heavy guard, where he was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of burglary. For the victims' families, it was a moment of relief, but also the beginning of a long and painful trial process. Pre-arrest, red flags. In hindsight, red flags have been visible. Weeks before his arrest, police dashcams captured Kohberger being pulled over twice in Indiana while driving with his father back from Washington to Pennsylvania. His demeanor was calm, almost rehearsed. At Washington State University, students described him as overbearing in class, challenging professors, and often making peers uncomfortable. Yet none of it, at the time, pointed directly to murder. The academic paper. Years earlier, in 2020, Kohberger had co-authored a paper discussing procedures in violent crime investigations. Prosecutors now suggest that the knowledge he gained about crime scene processing and evidence handling may have influenced the way he carried out the killings. Ironically, the very subject he studied became the trap that ensnared him. Strange online behavior. As investigators combed through his devices, they uncovered troubling searches and online activity. On Christmas Day, just 5 weeks after the murders, his phone showed activity linked to violent content, serial killer research, and methods of avoiding detection. Some of the data was unrecoverable, but what was found painted a disturbing portrait of obsession. Witness memory. Then there was the surviving roommate's account. In the early hours of November 13th, she recalled opening her door and hearing a man's voice mutter something like, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." The figure she saw wore a mask and passed silently toward the exit. That memory, later debated and clarified in court, only added to the chilling reconstruction of what happened inside the house. Piece by piece, the case against Bryan Kohberger tightened. The DNA, the car, the phone records, the behavioral patterns. Each was a thread, and together, they formed a net that prosecutors believed was unbreakable. On paper, he was a criminology scholar, but in the eyes of investigators, he had become the prime suspect in one of the most infamous student murders in American history. Courtroom battles. As the case against Bryan Kohberger moved forward, his defense team fought aggressively to dismantle the state's evidence. They filed motion after motion, arguing that the DNA taken from the knife sheath was improperly handled, that phone data and surveillance footage should be thrown out. But one by one, judges denied the requests. The evidence, they ruled, was admissible. The trial would go forward. By early 2024, it became clear the scale of the case would overwhelm the small courthouse in Loudoun County. After months of debate, the judge ordered a change of venue. The trial was moved nearly 300 miles away to Boise, where security and space could match the national attention that was certain to follow. The turning point. For more than 2 years, the defense prepared for trial. But in the summer of 2025, a turning point arrived. After weeks of negotiations behind closed doors, a deal was reached. To avoid the death penalty, Bryan Kohberger agreed to plead guilty to all charges. On July 2nd, 2025, in a Boise courtroom packed with reporters, law enforcement, and the victims' families, Kohberger stood and admitted to the murders of Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. The sentencing. 3 weeks later, on July 23rd, 2025, the same courtroom witnessed the final chapter of the legal process. Families of the victims delivered powerful impact statements, voices breaking with grief, yet unwavering in demanding justice. Survivors of that night spoke of their trauma, of fear that lingered, of lives forever changed. Judges and prosecutors listened in silence. Then came the sentence. For consecutive life terms in prison without parole, plus an additional 10 years. There would be no execution, but there would also be no release. For many, it was justice secured. For others, it was a reminder that closure does not erase loss. Lingering questions. Even with the guilty plea, questions remained. A motive was never made clear. Investigators believe Kohberger had studied his victims, possibly contacting them through social media. Some reports pointed to messages on Instagram, but no direct link was ever fully established. Why these four? Why that house? The answers, perhaps, will never be known. Aftermath. The case did not end with the sentencing. Families pursued lawsuits over leaked crime scene photographs that had been shared without authorization. The release of those images sparked outrage and renewed debates over privacy and accountability in high-profile cases. Meanwhile, Bryan Kohberger was transferred to the Idaho Maximum Security Institution. Inside, reports described him as quiet, detached, and watched closely under high-security protocols. Even in custody, breaches of privacy loomed. Stories circulated of other inmates attempting to gain information, of guards facing pressure to maintain secrecy. The scrutiny followed him even behind prison walls. Resolution. For the families of Kaylee, Madison, Xana, and Ethan, justice had come, though the cost could never be measured. For young lives were lost. A community was changed forever. And a man who once studied criminology was now condemned to live the rest of his days inside the very system he thought he understood. The trial was over, but the story, the grief, the unanswered questions, and the lessons it left behind will endure for years to come. The courtroom is silent now. The reporters have gone. The verdict is sealed. Bryan Kohberger sits behind reinforced walls, his future erased by the weight of 4 life sentences. But as the world moves forward, one haunting truth remains. No clear motive was ever revealed. For the families, that silence is unbearable. Kaylee's father has spoken time and again about the lack of answers. Xana's family wonders if their daughter was targeted or simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Ethan's loved ones remember his laughter, but are left tormented by why. Madison's friends still scroll through old photos, searching for a sign. The man who could answer those questions remains expressionless, refusing to speak beyond his guilty plea. Was this the calculated act of obsession? A twisted experiment by a criminology student desperate to prove his theories? Or something darker, an impulse that can never be explained? The prosecution proved how he killed, but why remains a void? And then there are the digital shadows. Investigators uncovered fragments, deleted searches, encrypted data, unrecovered files. What else was hidden? What questions might those lost pieces still answer? Could there be more victims or more attempts concealed in the silence of his devices? We may never know. As the house in Moscow, Idaho, stands quiet, a painful landmark of tragedy, the deeper truth feels suspended, waiting. For some, justice has been served. For others, justice feels incomplete, because without motive, there is no true closure. And so the story, waiting to surface one day, before we fade out tonight, we leave you with one final question. Was justice truly served, or have we only scratched the surface of a mystery far deeper than anyone dares to admit? We want to hear your thoughts. Do you believe Bryan Kohberger acted alone? Was there a hidden motive never uncovered? Or do you feel this case will forever remain unanswered? Comment below. Your perspective matters, and it helps keep the conversation alive for the families still searching for peace. And if this story unsettled you, know this. There are countless other cases, each with their own haunting questions, each deserving of attention. In our next feature, we'll dive into another chilling mystery. You can find the link in the description or right here on screen. Trust us, you won't want to miss it. If you found value in this video, if you believe stories like these must be told, help us continue our work by hitting the like button, subscribing, and turning on the notification bell. Every interaction helps keep these stories in the spotlight, ensuring the victims are never forgotten and the pursuit of truth never stops. This has been your True Crime Tales. Thank you for watching. Stay safe, take care of each other, and, as always, keep asking the questions others are afraid to ask.